and welcome back to another episode for Geography Lessons. Today we're going to discuss economic geography. Now in our previous episode we also looked at economic geography, but we focused on the primary activities that create economic development in South Africa. And we look in particular to farming and mining. But in today's lesson we're going to have a look at the secondary economic activities. Now these activities involves the processing and manufacturing of goods. Now this is quite a very important sector to South Africa's economy. Now I'm going to give you two examples over here. The first example I'm going to use from a primary activity of farming and mining that we discussed in the previous lesson. Now if I take farming for example, let's talk about grape farming taking place down in the Western Cape. So basically what happens, grape farming takes place. What do they do with the grapes? They process it, making wine from it, and then we ship it away. So where the processing takes place and they take the grapes and turn it into wine, that's a secondary activity. The same involves with mining. Let's say, for instance, the primary economic activity is coal, and then what do we do with the coal? We process, manufacture it, and we generate electricity from it. Or, in this case, we use Sasol as an example, making petrol out of it. Now, if you look at the notes quickly, it involves the processing of the raw materials and manufacturing of goods. And we use this word industries for secondary activities. So if there's a industry involved, you will note that it's a secondary activity because the raw materials are being processed. Now here's another example into farming, sugarcane farming. Now it's this industry with the sugar refineries. The term is wood, for instance, forestry is another example. The wood shavings are being used for paper. That's the processing of the wood to make another product. And we can look at stock farming as well as an example. The cow hides, they turn into the leather after the cows, for instance, being used for their meat. They can have another purpose, use their hides for leather, and then processing it, manufacturing in industries, making shoes or handbags out of it. Now we've got two different types of industries. Now we discussed it in our last lesson when we looked at the urban profile. Now we got light industries and we got heavy industries. And I hope you paid attention. When you look at the light industries, it's usually very close to the CBD and close to suburban areas. But our heavy industries are usually on the outskirts, on the rural-urban fringe. Now, if you can remember what the rural-urban fringe is, it's that transition zone from the urban areas to the rural areas. Now, if you just quickly look at a couple of examples, a light industry, it's like jewelry making, clothes factories, computer manufacturers, food and beverage. Now, the light industries will usually be very close to your consumers. The simple reason for it, because if you look at this example over here, it can be perishable, means the food can go off. So they need to be close to the consumer so the consumer can still use it and the product is still fresh. If you look at our heavy industries, for example, that's our power stations, iron and steel factories, motor vehicle factories and paper mills. They will usually be on the outskirts of city areas or suburban areas, mainly because of the amount of noise pollution and air pollution that they create. I mean, if you look at a power station, most of South Africa's electricity is still generated by coal power stations. If you look at the location, I've already mentioned it, in the city, in the CBD, or the zone of the DK. We discussed that also in the previous lesson, is the area just surrounding the CBD. Or many places have industrial estates, an area that's specifically for light industries. And very importantly, when we place these industries, we always make sure that they're close to many transport routes and easy access to main roads. Now, as you can see, the heavy industries, for example, is usually on the outskirts and sometimes very close to the source where the raw material is being extracted. Now, as you can see with the light industries, the raw material that's being used is very small, maybe partially processed. For example, let's take the jeweler for example. If you look at the quantity of diamonds, it's not going to be massive when he's making the rings and designing the rings. But if you look at heavy industries, and I'm going to use a coal power station once again, it's usually large and bulk, and it's not processed. So they take the raw material and they process it to turn it into something else what they need to use it for. The land requirements, no specific needs. It might be in multi-story buildings. But if you look at the heavy industries, a couple of things need to be important over there. They need to get water, enough water. They need flat land and usually single-story buildings. If you look at the infrastructure, it's using existing road networks and local power supply. So that's, for instance, same electricity that me and you use in our houses, supply these businesses with electricity as well as services, so, such as sewage, such as water, and such as electricity. Now, as you can see, these infrastructure change for heavy industries. They need to have access to railway lines and to major roads, and obviously water supply and power supply. Environmental impact. When we discuss environmental impact, we mainly look at pollution. Now, very little impact on the surrounding area. Most of the impact that this do create is for your urban heat islands. It might create higher temperatures in your urban areas because of the amount of pollution that they create. But your heavy industries, like we discussed previously, usually on the outskirts, because it utilizes a large amount of water, if you think of your mining industries, and it creates a lot of air and noise pollution. If you look at our next slide, if you look at the industrial development in South Africa. Now, I've explained it to my Gr12s before. The thing is, you know, South Africa is quite a rich country in raw materials. We've got gold, platinum, coal. But the problem is we don't process all of it. We usually export it. So in future, South Africa needs to develop, process. We need to create a secondary market. We need to create a bigger secondary market. If you look what the notes tells us, the availability of raw materials in South Africa has led to the development of large industries or factories. So what we do is we either finish the raw material products or we leave it semi-finished so that the final product can be manufactured somewhere else. Now, if you look at the factors affecting the location of an industry, we've already discussed it. If you look at the difference between the light industries and the heavy industries, there's quite a few factors, and the ones that we need to concentrate on is where the raw materials is. How close are the natural resources or raw materials to the industry to make this product? Now, it's pointless to be a great distance because, like we've mentioned in that table of the heavy industries, they're transported in bulk. And obviously, we need to keep in mind the distance between the market and the raw material is cost effective if it's closer to where the raw materials are situated. And then, like I've mentioned, where's the market? How close is the market so that we can sell this product? Now, keep in mind, it needs to be cost effective. So how closer the market is to the raw materials is cheaper for the companies and it's more profitable. Now, the following factors can also affect the location of the industry. Transport, once again, major transport routes between the industry and the raw materials, very importantly, and then energy. Now, unfortunately, if you don't have energy, you can't be profitable, you can't make money. So it's very important that these companies, these industrial companies, have consistent electricity to process these raw materials and eventually to make the final product, manufacture the goods. Vitally important. And unfortunately in South Africa, we kind of struggle with the demand for electricity because of the growing population. But the government did make plans, for instance, Cougar, and we try renewable energy these days to improve our energy sufficiency. Now, just like the same with our farming and mining, the reason why industrial development can be promoted, what's the factors promoting industrial development in South Africa, is once again, we have a wide range of different industries. And with that, we have different many raw materials. So we can basically process many things from our raw materials. As you can see over there, a wide range of raw materials support different productions. Now, very importantly over here, a well-developed infrastructure like roads and railway lines, water and electricity assist industries to do business. If we are sufficient and we have got decent roads and railway systems, it's easier to get the product from point A to point B. And obviously with enough water and electricity, the companies, industrial areas, the companies can work and can be more profitable. So it's very important that they have these basic necessities to make a success of their company. Now, the availability of cheap, level land makes it cheaper to develop industries. Now, keep in mind, if you want to build a factory, it's much cheaper to build the infrastructure on gentle, flat gradients than on hilly landscapes. And then once again, we saw it with farming and mining as well. We've got a large scale of unskilled and skilled labor force. Now, we discussed it in the last lesson. Unskilled is basically people who's not qualified. It's your basic laborers. If you look at skilled workers, it's people who's got qualifications or degrees, who knows the industry and has got exceptional knowledge in the industry that they are working. Now, unfortunately in South Africa, we got also factors hindering the industrial development in South Africa. It means we can't expand because there's some problems that arise from it. The biggest one is the distance between South Africa and the foreign markets. Now, if you look at it, most of our raw materials that we do mine are being shipped off to China, and that's extremely quite far. So the increase in transport cost makes profit less, unfortunately. Now, we did mention that we have unskilled and skilled labor force, but there's a shortage of skilled labor. Many of our skilled labor force do their trade in other countries, in foreign countries. Obviously, they might get paid more, or they get better living conditions, standard of living in those countries. Now, basically what happens, what does South Africa do? We need to get skilled labor force from a different country, and because of the exchange, we need to pay them much more than we would have paid our own people. Now, a big concern, we looked at it in mining as well, is our labor strikes. Now, the strikes not only taking place in our primary economic activities, but also secondary economic activities. And unfortunately, if people do not work, people are unproductive, and that means there's going to be an increased cost to make more money. And then another problem in South Africa, there's a shortage of water and electricity, but our government did make future plans so that this is not going to disadvantage us in the future. Now, what's the importance of industrial development in South Africa? Now, first of all, same with the primary economic activities. It provides jobs. It decreases unemployment in our country. And most importantly, we can make money off it. Foreign exchange, for instance, exporting our raw materials, that means income for the country. Now, that income in the country can improve services for all of us. Now, as you can see over here, industries provide more and higher paid employment opportunity for the population and increase the standard of living for the population. Now, when I'm talking about standard of living, provide decent services. For instance, providing electricity, providing clean drinking water, and providing good infrastructure such as roads and railway lines and public transport necessities. Furthermore, it increases the money from rates and taxes, very importantly, so the government can spend it in better infrastructure, like I've just mentioned, and other facilities. When I talk about other facilities, that includes schools as well. Now, the employment of people in these industries, especially secondary industries, it's more kind of skilled workers. So basically, if you do get employed by the secondary industry, the chances are very good that you're going to be taught a skill and you're going to gain experience. And at this turn, it leads to new technology. So it will make our unskilled labours, skilled labours. And at the end of the day, like we've mentioned in the first point, when I talk about other facilities, industrial growth will lead to the improvement in services and facilities. And that's basically looking after the population of the country. Now, South Africa have 4 main industrial regions in South Africa. Now, the first one is PWV. PWV stands for Pretoria Witwatersrand Vereniging, or in short, the Gauteng province. Now, it's the largest industrial region in South Africa. And later in this lesson, we're going to discuss the impact that this small area in South Africa have on our economy. Now, first of all, the reason why it's so successful, because it's got a large market. Most of your biggest markets are situated in the PWV Gauteng area. There's plenty of skilled and unskilled labor. There's many different kinds of raw materials surrounding the area. Well-developed transport routes. I mean, if you look at Gauteng itself, it's where the N1 and the N3 meet. The N3 travels from the PWV straight down to Durban, so it's easy access to the harbours over there. There's access to money. There's a lot of capital from banks and investors. If you look at Sandton for itself, lots of quaternary activities taking place there, and a lot of people with money who wants to invest in industrial development. If you look at the kind of industries that we find in the area, it's usually chemical factories, iron and steel factories that we usually find close to Vereniging, like African Steels, food and drink beverage factories, and motor vehicles are situated over there. Now, if you look at the next one, and we actually concentrated that in 2007 in the final November exam, was the Durban Pinetown industrial area. Now, this is the second largest area. The simple reason why is because of the transport routes that we find between Gauteng and Durban. Now, these heavy industries have access to this transport routes, and it makes it easier. Now, very importantly, if you look at Durban, and we're going back to settlement, it's a break of bulk point. Now, it's an urban area. Now, if you can remember what that break of bulk point is, it's got 2 separate systems of transport. It's when one form of transport are being used towards another form of transport. For instance, the shipping coming in from China, it leaves the harbour onto the trucks and eventually being transported to Gauteng. After the break, we will quickly continue looking at Durban Pinetown as the industrial area. See you in a bit.